Number 4. We Own This City Scandal. When the Baltimore City Police Department created the GTTF, it was intended to be an elite squad of highly trained officers tasked with seizing illegal guns. Instead, a trial in federal court has revealed that the officers went rogue and used their power to steal money, dope and guns, and terrorize the people they stopped. In some cases, they even resold the very dope and guns they were supposed to take off the streets. All but one of its members was indicted on robbery, extortion, and overtime fraud in March 2017 after a lengthy investigation by the FBI. 6 pleaded guilty, including Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, the unit's leader since June 2016. Testimony from 4 of the unit's former members revealed in greater detail the extent of the corruption and the lengths to which the GTTF would go to cover their tracks. Jenkins pleaded guilty to regularly stealing dope from the people he stopped or arrested. He resold the dope through a bail bondsman who testified that Jenkins would leave large amounts of marijuana, heroin, and coke in a shed in his backyard on an almost nightly basis. The 2 men split the proceeds. Jenkins admitted to stealing cash from people he stopped or arrested during his work as a police officer. In one case described at the trial, Jenkins directed his men to break open a safe containing over $200,000. Jenkins took half the money and 2 kilos of coke, then told the officers to reseal the safe and create a cell phone video pretending to open it for the first time, finding only $100,000 inside. He also admitted planting 28 grams of heroin on a man who was then sent to prison. According to trial testimony, after robbing a high-level dope dealer, Jenkins listened to the man's phone calls to his wife from jail, telling her to hire a lawyer. To stop her, Jenkins had his officers write a fake note, purportedly from the husband's mistress. The note was left in the wife's door. After Jenkins' arrest, federal agents found a huge cache of tools and weapons, including brass knuckles, an 18-inch machete, a sledgehammer, a grappling hook, and several black masks, which his former subordinate officers testified he intended to use for home invasions. Gondo admitted that he provided information and protection to a heroin operation, which included a childhood friend. This included giving advice to a dope dealer after he discovered a police GPS tracker attached to his car. During the trial, Gondo testified he and another officer planned a burglary, which included using a police tracking device to determine when their target was not home. They stole 800 grams of heroin, jewelry, watches, and a gun. Gondo admitted he routinely stole cash from people's homes when given the opportunity and split the take with his fellow officers. He told the jury that after one particularly large score, Jenkins told them, "Don't be greedy. We can do this 3 times a year." Detective Jamel Rayam admitted that he'd been stealing money long before he joined the Gun Trace Task Force, as early as 2009. He also resold stolen dope and split the proceeds with Jenkins. He stole $20,000 alongside 2 friends who posed as police officers during a home invasion. While committing a different masked home invasion with Officer Momodu Gondo, Rayam was surprised by a woman in the home and held her at gunpoint with his police-issued firearm. On the stand, Rayam wept after listening to a tape of himself and other members of the task force failing to render aid at the scene of a serious car accident they caused. "It could have been any of us. Any of you, my mother, my father," he told the jury. "We just didn't stop." Sergeant Thomas Allers. As the former head of the GTTF, he admitted stealing cash from civilians on several occasions during his police work, along with officers Herschel, Rayam, and Gondo. In one instance, Allers stole $10,000 he found while searching the home of a man named D.R. According to Allers' plea agreement, the man was later shot and killed by another man because he could not repay a drug-related debt. Detective Evodio Hendricks admitted stealing money on several occasions with his fellow officers during traffic stops and while executing search warrants. He told the jury that Jenkins instructed them to carry BB guns in their police cars in case you need to get yourself out of a situation like shooting an unarmed suspect. Detective Maurice Ward admitted stealing money during traffic stops and while executing search warrants. He told the jury that on one occasion he and Officer Taylor pulled rubbish from a house they needed a search warrant for and recovered evidence of marijuana. They later realized they had taken the trash from the wrong house but wrote up a fraudulent search warrant anyway. After the group stole over $100,000 from a safe, Ward testified he was given a $20,000 cut. He claims that because the amount was so large, he was scared he would be caught and dumped the money into a field behind his house. It was too much, he said. The bad outweighed the good. Detective Daniel Herschel was found guilty for his role in several robberies committed by the squad, including an incident where the officers took over $25,000 from a man's home without charging him a crime. All the officers were convicted of overtime fraud, filing paperwork to claim work they never showed up to do. In 2015, Herschel more than doubled his salary, in part from fraudulent overtime claims. Taylor was characterized at trial as the youngest and most inexperienced officer on the task force. Former officers testified that their main method of making arrests was door pops, driving up to large groups and throwing the doors open as if they were about to arrest someone. If anyone ran, the officers would chase after them. Taylor was the fastest, and the other officers relied on him to make the apprehensions. A jury also found Taylor guilty for his role in several robberies involving other members of the squad, including an incident where the officers stole over $100,000 from a high-level drug trafficker's safe. Number 3. The Dirty 30 Scandal. The Dirty 30 was a police corruption conspiracy that took place between 1992 and 1995 in the New York City Police Department's 30th Precinct, serving Harlem, and resulted in the largest collection of police officers charged with corruption in New York City in almost a decade. A group of rogue officers, led by Sergeant Kevin P. Nannery, participated in various unlawful activities, including civil rights conspiracy, perjury, extortion, grand larceny, and the possession and distribution of narcotics. The scandal led to several arrests of police officers and 2 suicides. The Dirty 30 were mostly stationed at the 30th Precinct in Harlem, Upper Manhattan. At the time, the area was known as the cocaine capital of the world to locals and law enforcement. Police corruption was extremely high around this time, and the Molland Commission was created to help investigate and eradicate corruption within the NYPD. Sergeant Kevin Nannery was among police supervisors who participated in the criminal conspiracy. His subordinate officers adopted the moniker Nannery's Raiders and participated in booming, making bogus radio calls to cover up illegal search and seizures on known dope dealers' apartments, where they took dope and large amounts of cash but did not enter their seizures into evidence. Instead, they sold the drugs from the 30th Precinct itself at half-market price to further their own profit. A gram of powdered coke sells for $50 to $90. In the 30th, the price is $20 to $25. An ounce, or a little more than 28 grams, goes for up to $1,200 elsewhere, more than twice what the best wholesale customers pay in the 30th Precinct. A kilogram, 1,000 grams, 2.2 pounds, can cost up to $22,000. But in the 30th Precinct, kilos often go for $16,000 to $18,000. In one case, Sergeant Nannery and 2 officers stopped a man in an apartment complex and took his keys before ransacking his apartment without a warrant. They let the man go after taking several $1,000s worth of drugs and cash. They also participated in various extortion schemes, with illegal drug wholesalers giving the officers weekly payoffs that ranged anywhere from $600 to $1,000. A squad car would pull up to a corner where these guys were working and just sit there, the investigator said. Business had to halt. Sooner or later, one of the guys would start talking, feeling out the officer. Maybe they could work something out. Maybe the cop should stop by a certain bodega. The cop goes away. He doesn't bother the corner again. At the end of the week, he goes to the bodega and gets his money. In 1993, Officer Otto Barry Brown went undercover in an investigation into the Dirty 30. The 2-year investigation included sting and surveillance operations. On the day of September 28, 1994, 29 police officers were arrested, and 5 of them pled guilty. In total, 33 officers were arrested by the conclusion of the investigation. Due to the investigation's outcome, 30 officers who were involved in 50 criminal cases had to be thrown out of court. Number 2. The Rampart Scandal. In Rampart Scandal, more than 70 officers were implicated in misconduct, including unprovoked beatings and shootings, planting and covering up evidence, stealing and dealing dope, and perjury. The Rampart Division of the LAPD, located west of downtown Los Angeles, was the most populous area of Los Angeles and had a primarily Latino population. It was also one of the busiest divisions in terms of calls for service and criminal activity. In the late 1970s and 1980s, the area experienced an increase in violent crime, particularly crime involving gangs, drugs, and weapons. To combat the rising violent gang crime, the department, then headed by Chief Daryl Gates, created a group of elite anti-gang units called CRASH. The type of officers who were selected for those units were those not afraid to talk to gang members. Gates intended the officers to mix with gang members in order to gather intelligence to be used for the prevention of violent crime. According to some measures, CRASH was very successful in reducing crime, and CRASH officers were gratified because they were no longer tied to the radio handling calls for service and no longer had to wear uniforms. CRASH developed a culture of its own in which officers began emulating gang members in dress and manner. They had a reputation among Los Angeles street gangs as being tough and promoting violence, and it was later to emerge, many of them succumbed to the temptation to engage in corrupt behavior such as stealing and selling dope. Such illegal behavior continued for several years until it came to official notice. In May 1998, after concerns surfaced about the actions of some officers, LAPD Chief of Police Bernard Parks named an investigative task force. Its attention came to focus on one CRASH officer in particular, Rafael Perez. Perez was arrested in August on suspicion of having stolen 8 pounds of coke valued at more than $1 million from a police evidence locker in 1998. As a part of a plea agreement for a reduced sentence, he agreed to cooperate with investigators and provided information on more than 70 officers, including police supervisors who committed corrupt acts or allowed them to occur. Perez testified in court that CRASH officers essentially became a gang. They wore skull tattoos with cowboy hats and poker cards portraying the dead man's hand of aces and eights. In addition to reporting the theft of money and drugs, Perez described some of the horrific actions that he claimed police officers in the CRASH unit committed. Some of the more chilling allegations were that officers had slaughtered or attempted to slaughter innocent people and planted weapons on them to cover up the crimes. One example was the police shooting of a man, Juan Saldana, while he was running in an apartment hallway. Saldana fell to the floor and the officers planted a gun on him to justify the shooting. Officers then fabricated a cover-up story while Saldana bled to death. Other innocent victims were paralyzed or served time in prison on trumped-up charges. These crimes, according to Perez, were celebrated and rewarded by CRASH supervisors. Officers were able to operate undetected because they insulated themselves from by-the-book officers and supervisors. For an officer to become a CRASH member, he or she needed to have a CRASH member as a sponsor. Even after being selected, a new member's behavior was monitored to make sure that he or she was not a snitch. There were also tests of planting weapons in which new members had to participate to show their loyalty to the CRASH unit. Eventually, the corruption within the Rampart Division became well known within the force, and law-abiding officers transferred out of the division, while corrupt officers requested transfers in. Little was done to curb the corruption because the units were reducing crime in the area. Because of Perez's cooperation with investigators, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and received immunity from further prosecution. He was released from prison in July 2001. The racial and ethnic implications of these events were evident to many observers. The victims of the police slayings and woundings, and those who were routinely arrested on fabricated evidence and charges, were young, poor, working class, African Americans, or Latinos, some of whom were recent immigrants. Members of those minorities consistently felt victimized by the police. Racial tensions were already running high between citizens and police in the aftermath of the 1991 Rodney King beating by several Los Angeles police officers and the subsequent acquittal of 3 of the officers in 1992, which sparked 4 days of violent riots in Los Angeles. As a result of the scandal, the city of Los Angeles faced more than 140 civil lawsuits, with an estimated settlement cost of $125 million. The investigation resulted in the overturning of more than 100 cases and the uncovering of corruption in many more. Number 1. The Miami River Cops Scandal. The Miami River Cops Scandal was a major police corruption case that occurred in Miami, Florida during the mid-1880s. It is considered one of the most significant instances of police corruption in United States history. The scandal came to public attention on July 28, 1985, when 3 bodies were discovered floating in the Miami River. What initially appeared to be a botched police raid was revealed to be a dope rip-off gone wrong, perpetrated by corrupt police officers of the Miami Police Department. The River Cops were a group of 19 police officers convicted of various state and federal crimes, including assassination, racketeering, robbery, dope possession, civil rights violations, and conspiracy charges. Beginning in 1984, a group of officers, later dubbed the Enterprise, started to steal cash and dope from motorists stopped for traffic violations to later sell for a profit. They then started to go after bigger operations by getting tip-offs from informants. On July 13, 1985, the officers seized hundreds of kilograms of cocaine in secret compartments of the Mitzi Ann, a boat docked at the Tamiami Marina. In July 1985, 10 people dressed as officers forced their way into the Jones Boatyard along the Miami River, of where the name River Cops derives from. They raided a shipment of dope on a pleasure boat named the Mary C., taking 350 to 400 kilograms of coke, worth around $10 million at the time, equivalent to $29 million in 2024. During the raid, 3 of the 7-person crew unloading the coke drowned attempting to escape. It was believed to be a raid gone bad until a night watchman revealed that they were actual police officers who raided the boatyard. One witness even testified that they had their weapons drawn and were yelling, "Kill them! Kill them!" as they approached. Some of the seized coke was kept for personal use, but most was sold. The corruption was uncovered during the investigation into the deaths at the Jones Boatyard, and when officers were apprehended attempting to sell the coke to undercover agents, as well as a covert recording sting operation at the helm of Metro Day detective Alex Alvarez. The first trial of the River Cops started in September 1986 with Armando Estrada, Rodolfo Arias, Roman Rodriguez, Armando Garcia, Arturo de la Vega, Osvaldo Coelho, and Ricardo Aleman as defendants, but resulted in a mistrial after jurors could not agree on a verdict. 20 officers, including the original 7 from the first trial, were indicted as part of a new trial. After Arias became a prosecution witness, 10 officers pleaded guilty, and 2 were convicted at trial in February 1988. In the end, nearly 100 officers had been arrested, fired, suspended, or reprimanded. City officials cited community growth lead to lax hiring standards as well as terrible supervision of officers. In the 1980s, Brooklyn, New York was suffering from a crack epidemic. Michael Dowd worked in the NYPD's 75th Precinct in the East New York neighborhood of Brooklyn, which was considered to be one of the most dangerous precincts in the United States at the time. The 75th Precinct had one of the highest murder rates in the country during the late 1980s. Dowd describes being underappreciated for the work he put in and hurting for money as the reasons for taking money from drug dealers. He initially began taking bribes from drug dealers on the streets before moving on to protecting a drug cartel leader and robbing other drug dealers at gunpoint. Dowd and his then-partner Henry "Chicky" Guevara recount the first time walking into a domestic dispute in an apartment and seeing bags of marijuana, a duffel bag filled with approximately $20,000 in cash, and 2 guns. Dowd communicated that he and his partner would take $8,000 from the duffel bag and both guns. Dowd continued to rob drug dealers for thousands of dollars. Guevara resigned shortly after multiple police officers were arrested in the 77th Precinct for corruption-related offenses. Ken Urel, a police officer at the 75th Precinct, was then assigned as Dowd's new partner in June 1987. Urel had a drinking problem and frequently drank on the job. Dowd and Urel met a Dominican gang leader named Adam Diaz. Diaz ran the Diaz Organization, a gang that was responsible for countless murders and drug trafficking throughout New York City. He used several supermarkets in East New York as fronts to traffic drugs, mainly cocaine. Dowd and Urel began a working relationship with Diaz, where they provided protection and inside information about raids. After a prolonged investigation, the Suffolk County Police Department arrested Dowd and Urel on drug trafficking charges. In addition to their work for Diaz in the city, the men had begun distributing coke through a friend who lived in the county. Dowd and Urel were released on bail. While out on bail, Dowd was approached by a friend in a Colombian gang who wanted a woman kidnapped over an unpaid drug debt. Dowd's plan was to hand the woman over to the gang and for him and Urel to take the hundreds of thousands of dollars at the woman's house and flee the United States. Urel agreed to Dowd's kidnapping scheme, but instead of following through with the scheme, contacted Internal Affairs through his lawyer. Shortly after, in July 1991, Dowd was arrested and sent to trial. He was the main focus of the 1992 Mullen Commission that investigated police corruption in the NYPD. In the wake of Dowd's arrest, Mayor David Dinkins appointed the Mullen Commission to investigate police corruption within the NYPD. As a result, dozens of officers across the city's precincts were arrested.